Good afternoon, everybody. We're excited to be back for our latest portion of our podcast. We're excited that we came up with our name thanks to Assistant Director Demi Tetrold. Our podcast will now be called Youth Centered. And this is the fourth in the edition, and I'm very lucky here to have a guy that I consider a friend and someone I truly respect in the business, Andy Van Horn. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Andy.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
We're also doing something a little bit different today. We're also going to be videotaping this, so it'll also be seen on cam. So we're excited about that, and hopefully Andy and I look all right behind camera also. Andy, I've asked to come on the podcast today because over a number of years, him and I have had some great conversations on building culture, and building culture in a variety of places. As a teacher, him building culture in the classroom, myself building culture at the youth center, and then both of us are big fans of sports and the whole key of building culture within the sports teams. And Andy's a coach here at the high school. So, Andy, for the people that may have not had you for class or their parents are not aware of you, little history of Andy Van Horn.
Well, I grew up in the Merrimack Valley, went to Methuen High School. I have a wonderful wife who keeps me grounded, 3 children, Reagan, Grant, and Calvin, and they help me keep it real at all times. They're the best things in my life. I've been teaching history here at North Andover High School for 15 years. Guilty pleasures, I like to bake bread, and I love to read. So it's a little bit about myself.
That's awesome. We talk a lot, like I said, about building culture. When I say building culture, to you and to our listeners today, what's that mean to you in building culture?
When I think of culture, I think of values-based, purpose-driven culture. So really what we're talking about is you have a standard and you have a plan in implementing that standard. So that's what I look at or I think of when we're developing culture, whether it's in the classroom or in sports teams or really anywhere. If you want to be successful, it's got to be values-based and it's got to be purpose-driven. And really by doing that and having that culture, you're just making better people. I think that's when I think of culture, you just want to make people better by being involved with your program or classroom or whatever it is.
Sure. When I first got to hear of the name Andy Van Horn, kids would come to the youth center and talk about why your class was maybe different than other people, and more engaging, and they felt more in tune to some of the learning that they were getting from your classes. How do you build culture in the classroom? And is it done basically with the text of what you're trying to teach? Do you have other ways to gauge kids?
I think the biggest thing is I'm passionate about what I teach. Even my coaching, I'm passionate as well. So I think if it's something that you love to do, I think that the kids see that. And so for me, in my teaching, I try to bring the energy and bring that passion, and hopefully the kids see that. And I think they respect you when you're honest with them.
Absolutely. Can you give us some ideas of maybe, I know that you are a very passionate person. What are some things that when you get kids in the 1st of September or the 2nd semester, what are some of the ways that you implement your culture to the kids right from day one?
I think the biggest thing is I want the kids to know that I care about them. In the sense that I have my own children and I know that they're my number one priority, but also that I care about them individually, and I want them to do well in the class, but also I want them to know that I care about them, and I try to make a point at least once a week to touch base with each of the kids in my class, beyond just the class-wide hello, to go over to someone and say, hey, how are you doing today? Or, hey, are you in the band? I heard you guys have a concert this weekend. Or, hey, how's the soccer team doing? Something like that, I think, goes a long way with kids, especially when you're in a big school and maybe you may not be a superstar athlete or you may not be the lead in the play. I think you want to make everyone feel like they play an important part in your classroom. Just like with a team, you want to make everyone feel that they have a role and that you care about them. I think that's that values-based. If kids see that you value them as a person, they're going to want to do better in your classroom or on your team or anything like that.
I love how you talked about connecting with kids. So at the youth center, as my staff knows, we have a big policy of relationship building and really connecting with kids. And it's as simple as some of the things you're saying hello to someone when they walk in the door at the youth center at 2:30, asking them how they're doing, showing some interest in other things. And obviously our staff has some of their own interests, but for someone like me, it's very clear that the sports guys come up and talk to me all the time, or some of the girls that are actually doing a number of amazing things. But I'll go out and reach some of the kids that are quiet and just ask them how they're doing. And I'm amazed how they perk up. And it's very simple. I try to tell people we're not reinventing the wheel here, just kind of connecting. And then once you can build that relationship, I think building the culture that you want to do it in the classroom or on a sports team is so much easier. We talk about, I think, our passion. I think passion is a great adjective that kind of describes both of us. But, sometimes there's roadblocks into building culture. Any roadblocks that you've seen in the classroom as trying to build culture?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, certainly personally, one of the roadblocks I faced early on was when I played sports or when I was younger. I think the culture that we grew up in was a lot different. And I actually taught, or not even so much in the classroom, but certainly coaching. I coached and utilized a culture that I was brought up in, and that necessarily wasn't, in hindsight, the best for kids. So I think when you look at the roadblock, certainly myself, I was a roadblock early on in developing culture. So, being able to self-actualize and see you for who you are, and then being able to change from that, I think that's one roadblock. Another, I just think, time. I think kids are spread so thin today, as well as adults. Like, we all live in this fast-paced world. I think that time is a roadblock, because you want to implement this culture and you want kids to know that you care, but they've got their friends they got to worry about. They've got mom and dad. We were talking before, where am I going to college, or where am I going? All these different things. I think that's a roadblock as well. So I think myself, certainly, I was a roadblock to creating that culture, and then as well, we have a finite amount of time in our days, and trying to address culture and work and family time and all those things. Those are roadblocks in trying to establish that.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I think that we're lifelong learners in the area of culture. People will say to me, "Wow, you've built a really good culture," and I don't stop learning on that. Just take Villanova's national championship 2 days ago. I've picked up some things from Jay Wright to kind of might maybe apply to the high school and maybe apply to the youth center a little bit more. So we're lifelong learners on that. And I agree, the time thing is tough. Like, we want to build such culture. And sometimes there's not enough time in the day. And obviously, another podcast topic should be how kids are over programmed and parents are stressed out. So we'll add that to our list.
Absolutely.
Of things. You've been as well as a teacher here, you've been a very successful coach, and you've coached a number of different sports. I actually first got involved with you from an athletic standpoint with your very popular speed and strength program that you've done with all of the teams here at the high school, but also the amazing job in the summertime that you get with the kids at early in the morning. And you and I have worked close as forming some relationships with Gatorade, and as well as a lot of symbolism that we've used. I was actually fortunate to borrow your Game of Thrones throne for last summer for some symbolism that we did. Talk to me a little bit about culture on the sports aspect, similarities and differences with the classroom, and if you can touch on maybe some of those symbolisms that you've used.
Yeah, well, I think when I think of a culture, when I look at sports teams around here, a culture that's really been successful, one of the most successful would have to be the track program here at the high school. Just looking at programs that I'm not involved with, and I say, okay, who has established a positive culture where the kids are buying in, where they've taken the leadership role to where they now are implementing the values of the program without the head coach telling them. I look at the North Andover track program. I think they do a tremendous job. That's just one example, I'm sure, of many programs that do a good job with culture here. But I think those successful teams, they have a culture where the seniors, the juniors, the sophomores, they all work for each other, and they understand the standard, and they apply that standard to everyone. And it's cliche, and I've seen it online, but they don't tell people. The coach doesn't tell people what to do. They tell people that's not how we do things here. And I think that's when we look at successful cultures. It's where it's not a top-down approach, but where everyone now is, buying into this is how we do things, and going from there. So far as symbolism, we've used, going back to the time of coaching with John Rafferty with the football program, I think hard work goes a long way. For us, symbolism with the football program was this year we had the lunch pail. And so it's, and I stole that from Virginia Tech. And the idea of the lunch pail mentality of, the guys working, the iron workers or the coal miners or anything, going down, doing an honest day's work and being rewarded for it. And so for us, the symbolism of, putting in the time, understanding that it is difficult and there are going to be challenges, but then getting the job done. That's some of the symbolism we've utilized.
Yeah, we've actually incorporated some of your ideas over the last couple of years. This past summer, we used, basically a power driver, that we basically symbolized that we're pounding rock and, trying to eventually chip away at rocks and then get the finished product. And what we've found with the kids is they've really embraced the symbolism piece. So, whether it's using the hard hat or the lunch pail or an axe or some of the things that we've done, kids love to win that. And what we've seen also is it's created that, not just the kids who score the most points or do the things get recognized, but the people that are putting all the lunch pail efforts. I enjoyed watching your post during the fall with the football team, and a number of the kids that won that award were not the kids that I would read about in the newspaper, but just kids that gave an effort and built a culture. And it's pretty exciting to see the culture being built. One of the things that we started this year with the boys basketball team, Paul Tanglis, we met and we talked about doing a culture training. And thanks to Stachi's Pizza, we fed the kids, and then we actually spent about 5 hours working on, team goals, some of the things that they might think that they need to be successful or whatever. And it was really successful. Looking next year to also do it with Meg Pinkston in the girls program. And then ultimately, quite frankly, we'd love to offer that service to all of the sports teams because I think the kids got a lot out of it. It was an enjoyable evening, and I think, and I don't want to say that the culture night had anything to do with the boys going to winning the Division II North, but it didn't hurt, and it was definitely something that the kids think back, fondly on. So, so where do you see culture going? I mean, is this something? Do you think that it's just in a little bit of a heyday right now? Do you think it's here to stay? And maybe some thoughts to some of the young teachers out there that are maybe thinking about how to build culture in their classroom or on a sports team.
I think the biggest challenge with culture is being able to identify what your vision is, and then creating that plan, and then consistently adhering to it. That is what I see being the biggest challenge for developing a culture, whether you're in the classroom or a sports team. Oftentimes in sports, I talk to my players about controlling what they can control. You can control your attitude, you can control your effort, and I think the same thing goes with culture now. You try to identify simple things that you can control within your team culture, and then you consistently, be fair and firm in the application of those cultural norms. And I think if you can do that, you develop a culture, and I think that has far-reaching consequences. So like something like you mentioned with the basketball team, I think hopefully something like that, where that I don't want to belittle it by saying a small activity, but like a one-time activity, hopefully that builds into something now that translates into, when they're in the classroom or when they see someone maybe off the athletic field that is a teammate, it says, hey, that's not what we're about. That's not what we do. And then that translates into something bigger. We always talk about from small things, something big happens. I was talking to my children about that the other day. And I think hopefully that's something where you have teams meeting and talking about culture. Maybe that's where we start talking about becoming a more inclusive school. Maybe that's where that first step comes from the athletic teams. But that's definitely, culture is not going to go away. I think it's something that needs to be established, and it's something that needs to be developed, and it has to be nurtured. I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't acknowledge the importance of culture.
Absolutely. Very well said. One of my things that I'm looking to work with, and I've talked to, Jen Price about this, and obviously working with Superintendent Gilligan when he takes over, is kind of helping people understand culture and to build it. I think there's a lot of people that have actually said to me, I like what you do, Rick, but I don't know if I can do that. And I say it to you, and I know what you mean on this. We're not solving world hunger here. I do think that it is something that people need a little bit encouragement, some skill, and there is some skill to doing it. Something that I think that comes natural to you and I right now could be terrifying to some other people. And I just think the more we can help people, be better at it and train them at it, and do some skill development with it, all the better. Because I agree with you, culture's not going anywhere.
And I think a lot of people think of culture probably like, oh, I was in college and I did these icebreaker activities and they're very uncomfortable for me and I don't want to do it and I didn't get anything out of it. And I think even something like that, it was a one-time thing that never went any further. And I think that's the other piece, mentioned with culture, is that you have this vision and then you consistently adhere to whatever the culture is and you reinforce it constantly. That it's just so important.
I think you're doing a great job with it, and by the way, tons of other teachers within our system that are doing some great stuff with culture, and I'm always trying to find out from people what they're doing, and we're all robbers to a certain degree, steal some ideas and see how it incorporates into this. You and I may be two of the greatest fans of Game of Thrones, and both of us are pretty upset we have to wait a whole nother year before we get the final season. But I look at the Game of Thrones in a lot of ways. I've actually said to you, you and I should teach a class at North Andover High School on Game of Thrones, because I think some of the themes and everything are very relative to what happens in life. But I can't let you go without talking a little Game of Thrones here. What's the wait been for you? I know you've read every book. You've been up to speed. You're my mentor. I think I didn't get into Game of Thrones until year 3, and then Andy said you got to check this out. And I've seen every episode twice, and obviously looking forward to it. But what are some of your thoughts for the season, and how do you relate culture with that?
I'm actually more disappointed that they haven't written the new book yet, because that's taken much longer than it needs to come out. I love Game of Thrones because I've talked to Meg Pinkston about this before. I think that every character you can relate to someone that you know in life. I don't know who my Ramsay Bolton would be, but I think there's always a character you can relate to life. And so, I'm sorry, the previous question?
Well, I just wanted to ask you, how do you relate that to culture? And I think you talked a little bit about, and I agree with you. I walk around life and I basically say, this is the character from, Littlefinger is definitely, that's the guy that's Littlefinger. And again, I don't know if we have Ramsay Bolton, and hopefully we don't, but, a lot of the characters are just very relatable to everyday life, even though it's a mythical fantasy TV show. Every aspect of alliances and people doing right and people doing wrong and that like.
I think in regards to culture then in Games of Thrones, I think of, I was just reading a book called Legacy, about the All Blacks New Zealand rugby team.
Yes.
And in it they talked about integrity. And so I think of characters like Jon Snow, and you think of integrity and your ability to keep one's word. I think that that is something certainly you pull away from Game of Thrones, and I think that's one of the reasons that people would like a character like Jon Snow, is that he is a person of integrity, that even though you're watching the show and you say, why are you doing this, Jon? This doesn't seem like the best idea. He's someone that keeps his word, and even I think that's one person that I would look at, and I would say, when you talk about culture and relate it, someone like Jon, you want a Jon Snow on your team, you want that guy that where he stands, that he's not going to waver when push comes to shove.
Absolutely. I mean, as you know, my favorite show of all time is The Wire, and I know Principal Chet Jackson agrees with me on this. But The Wire, after being ended for 10 years, has become a subject matter for a lot of college classes in both communications, criminal justice, and social work. Amazing show. If you've never seen it, I ask people to check it out, and you can relate it. I think we're going to be talking the same way about Game of Thrones at some point when we can relate it. And unfortunately, I see in terms of athletics, I see a lot with Game of Thrones in terms of, alliances being built, or someone, and where's loyalty, and, where is, commitment and things like that. So, at some point in time, you actually might be running a class on Game of Thrones. But how about for our listeners? I know you have an idea what's happening in the final season. What's going to happen?
I have no idea. I have no idea where the White Walkers are going to end up. I don't know how they're going to stop them. I have no idea what's going to happen with the Targaryen. I really have no idea, Rick. I've thought about this question long and hard, and I really cannot see an end to this.
it's gonna be a sad day for both of us when it's over. But same with you. I'm looking at all different things. What happens to Daenerys and Brandon and who really is Jon Snow? And obviously I love Jon Snow for a lot of the things you talked about, the integrity and stuff, and you want to see that he's still standing at the end, but you're not 100% sure. And we're all wondering what's going to finally happen to Cersei and everything else. So I guess we have to wait another year, but I do tell people, do not go to YouTube, because everyone has a scenario of what's going to happen, and I don't know if anybody has the inside source or not, but do not call me on Sunday nights starting next year, because I will be unavailable for the last season. So any final thoughts you want to kind of send maybe to our younger population on embracing culture?
I think, again, you want to try to identify what you hold dear to you, what you value about yourself, about your family, and then whenever you're making decisions, make sure that the decisions you make are true to who you are and what your family hold dear to them. I think that's the beginnings of culture, and really you want to be a better person, and you want to make other people become better people. I think that's the biggest cultural norm I think we can all embrace is, we just want to make people better people. And I think that transcends the classroom or the sports field. And if we all did that, it'd be a much better place, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Very well said. I look forward to continue working with you. We share a lot of, obviously, the same philosophies on things. And, my big push, and I'm asking you to do it too, is to continue and embrace pushing culture building. And there's just so many ways we can do it. But as you said earlier, culture is here to stay, and we need to do the best we can to continue to build culture. I want to thank Andy for coming on our podcast. Next week, we will be having Assistant Director Demi Tatro, who's going to come in because there's a lot of questions from parents on our summer program. So we're going to do the nuts and bolts of everything about how to sign up, what's still available for programs, and they're all tricky. How do I transport my kid there, etc. So she'll do a little Q&A with us, and we're looking forward to that. As always, thank you to Susan and NACAM for helping us, and hopefully we also look pretty good on video and not just the podcast audio. And as we always say, too much passion is not enough passion.